share the rest of my screen? Okay, it's gonna take some time to catch up with me. There we go. Alright. Can everyone hear me clearly? Just put this aside so that people who are just joining can have a look. And ignore the Skype thing. It's how I connect to the webinar's audio channel. Alright, everyone, please test the chat box, and I'll just write a message quickly for the people who are just joining, again, about the audio. But if you have any questions, just write to me through the chat box. Again, it's through the second button when you hover on your screen on the top. Alright, so I actually built this checkout system that's really easy. It's about checking out books, obviously, for a library, but I mean, I know that a lot of people have their company resources, like a device lab or a gym or anything like that, and it might work differently for each case. So if you write to me in the chat box about your own case, I'd be happy to give an example. I usually, in these types of webinars, I don't go through the basic sheet building, but I do talk about some technical differences between linking types. But if you have any questions about the basics, please don't hesitate to let me know again, and we'll go through that. It seems like we don't really have that many participants today, but that's alright. I will go through the entire checkout process, and again, please don't hesitate to stop me if I am going too fast or if the screen can't catch up with me. We actually are going to be using YouTube's broadcasting in the future. This program that we're using right now is only temporary, and I do hope in the future it will be more improved with streaming. But yeah, currently we're using this. Alright, so I will talk about the system that I created first, and then go through the steps on creating the checkout. So you can see that my book sheet over here has a simple structure of a few fields, and then about the book. So about this, I know in a lot of cases you kind of want to use the ISBN numbers, but unfortunately that might be a mistake, because you know that one book, for example, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, has the ISBN 10 and ISBN 13 number, which is fine if I had one copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. So if I had several copies of the same book, I kind of want to identify those different copies for a library setting. That's what we're talking about. And you know that libraries have several copies of each book sometimes, and you don't really want to use the ISBN as a unique identifier for each book as an object. Alright, so this is why I created a book ID for each book. And even if I wanted to have 2 copies of To Kill a Mockingbird over here, from Tools and Clone Entry, this is a great way if you want to like copy the entire field values without with generating a new book ID. So if I wanted to have a second copy of this book, I would have a different book ID, even though the ISBN number is the same. So I do recommend you to figure out what is the unique identifier, and if it's really unique to that one thing that's going to be in your database. I see this a lot with names as well. So in my clients over here in my library members, you can see that I have a number of people, with very common names. So if I had a second John Smith, he wouldn't be the John Smith over here. He would be a different John Smith. This is especially, sorry, I know that the screen is loading a little bit slower than I'm talking. Just let me know if I'm going too fast, alright? So John Smith can be a student, and John Smith can be a teacher in a school library, and I wouldn't know the difference unless I create different separate entries without using their names as the key identifier. So that's why I had this member number over here. And well, I can have more fields in here. I just have the basic ID number, the first name and last name, and their sign up date. And I will have the books that they have checked out in the past in a bit. Alright, so any questions so far? By the way, for the people who just joined, I hope you can hear me. And if you hover on your screen, the second button on the top is the chat button, and you can ask me anything or like interrupt me and um, say things related to the webinar, or if you have questions or if I'm going too fast, just let me know, alright? We don't seem to have many people today, so that's a good advantage if you want to ask a lot of questions, alright? Because the week before, I had a webinar with like 10 people. Continuously, people kept joining, and in the end, we had like 20 visitors in total. And it was pretty dynamic with a lot of questions, so I really like to answer all the questions when I get them, so please don't hesitate, alright? Okay, so any questions so far? Yes, no, no? Okay, so for my checkout system, I already created this sheet to test some things out to see what works best for this particular library, but I'm going to build this from scratch again. But basically on my checkout system, I have a checkout ID, which this is auto-generated by Ragic as well, so I don't really have to bother with this. It's just a unique number that identifies um, the checked out book and the time. Anyway, okay. So I linked the books sheet to specify which book is being checked out, and I also needed a checkout date and return date. We actually need a due date as well, so I'll add that, and if it's been returned yet or not. I also added a link to the library members sheet, and that just specifies who checked this book out. And of course, you can have more fields according to what you are doing. For example, who checked this Sarah Jackson out, which librarian was working, and whatnot. But in this context, I want to simplify things and focus on the checkout process. And this returned field has a formula to check if the return date is empty or full. And if it's empty, it's saying it's not returned. And if it is not empty, it will say it's returned. In return, the book sheet. So we go back to Of Mice and Men, which was the book that was being checked out. If that book was returned from that one checkout on our subtable that is a reference to our checkout sheet, then the book will say available because it was returned. Alright? Any questions so far? Now I'm going to build this system from scratch. So if there's any confusion right now, just let me know and I'll try to address it during. No? Alright. Then I'll be moving on. So in order to like kind of do this from the top, I'm going to delete this subtable first. So I will be removing that formula over here. I'll be removing this subtable from the book sheet. Okay. Okay. So we can create this checkout sheet from the top and you'll see what I mean. So if I create a new sheet for the checkout, alright, we will add date reminders. Actually, a good way to do that would be to send an email to the person who checked the book out and then say that it's due in 5 days or something like that. We can do that in a bit. Alright, I'm going to create the checkout sheet, and I need the checkout ID as an individual unique identifier for each book being checked out by people. So I'll just edit this formatting over here for the auto-generated field. So on the formatting box underneath here, there are tons of like formatting options you can choose from. This one will format my checkout ID by the CO, kind of like PO in the example, but mine is going to be CO, and then it's going to be the year, month, and date, and then a number. So my first checkout would be 2016, CO 2016, 10 and 26 for today, 001. All right. So if you have more than a thousand checkouts a day, you can add zeros over here. All right, understood? Okay. And now I will probably need the checkout date, return date, and these are going to be the basis for my formula and the next field, which is going to be returned or not. So this one is going to be a selection field for me because it's either a yes or no. Yeah, I don't know why the screen is very slow today. Anyway, just let me know if you missed anything. Alright, so, and I'll need a formula for here. So, this returned field will have to say it was returned if the return date has a value in it. So if I want to do that, I would say if A4 is empty, then it was not returned. Otherwise, it was returned when it's not empty. Okay, let's save that and try it. So if I had a book checked out on the 23rd, it's not returned yet if I don't have a value in here, and when I have a value in here, it's going to turn into yes. Everything clear so far? Alright, so I'm actually going to add a book now as a linked field. So what we want to do is go back to the design mode and click Sheet Linking Tools. On the top. And the first one is Link and Load, which is going to help me select a book from the book ID. So book ID, and I kind of want to link the rest of the fields too, except the availability, which is going to be updated on the other side. Okay, so this will allow me, if people are not familiar with the link and load process, the blue connected field is the key field, which is the linked field on here. And these gray ones will be loaded, so whenever I select a book ID, the related book information will be filled from the other sheet. Alright, so I'm also going to link the library members in the similar with this method. Alright. It seems like our streaming is a little bit slow, but if you have any questions, just let me know through the chat or if I'm going too fast, alright? Okay, so this book, let's say the book that was being checked out at, on the 23rd and returned on the 26th, then is like Fahrenheit 451 by Timothy, alright? So for this book, I kind of want the book to show if it was checked out or not and if it's available or not. So let's go back to the book sheet. On here, and from change design, I will add, since we already have the linked field that links the book to the checkout sheet, on here I can use show references from existing sheets. This will insert a subtable with all the checkout information. Again, the streaming is a little bit slow, but it's the fourth option from sheet linking tools over here. There we go. And if I click this, it will show me that my checkout checkout sheet can be dragged and dropped over here. And for this, we will need the checkout ID, the checkout date, return date, and the return status, as well as the person's ID. The ID is for the person, so I'm going to kind of organize this a little bit. We don't need the ISBN or title and author because that's already in our sheet over here. So let's kind of arrange this. And I'll insert the subtable now and save. So that's going to display my book was being checked out by Timothy Hopkins on the 23rd and it was returned on the 26th. And the availability should be available, but I'm going to add a formula on the availability to say that if it was not returned, then it's not available yet. Alright, you can also add like other systems to this. For example, if a book is going to be repaired or restored or anything, or it's removed, then the availability is going to be not available. Alright, so I'm going to add the formula to the design mode. So going back, the availability formula would be to check if D9, so the returned yes or no status field is yes or no, which is Y or N. So if the last, because we will have different checkout records for the same book, I want to know the last value for D9. So if the last of D9 equals to yes, then my book is going to be available. Actually, let's check available or not available. Yeah, and not available if else. Alright, and I'm going to save this. I will actually test this by creating a new checkout for the same book. So let's say that that book was checked out yesterday on the 23rd and returned today, but today someone also checked it out. So today, it's not returned yet. The book is To Kill a Mockingbird. Was it? Okay, so John Smith checked out the book To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and it was not returned yet. So let's check the book. We can actually have a look by hovering over here. So if it's not returned yet, it's not going to be available. Yeah, sure. So my formula is actually on the book sheet because I want the book to be updated. On my books, let's go back again. So To Kill a Mockingbird is not going to be available because the last field for my subtable that says if the book was returned or not is going to be yes or no. So if it was returned, I want the book to be available, and if it was not returned, I want the book to be not available. So the last formula over here that I'm using is checking the last field of the subtable, so the one on the bottom. If we have more rows in the subtable, which is going to happen because the book is going to be checked out constantly when it's returned, hopefully, if people are book readers, it's going to be returned constantly, and this availability needs to be checked on the books sheet. Okay, so if I wanted to add a new checkout for the same book, let's use book 2 again for the example's sake, because I think I used the wrong copy. Oh, sorry. I will need to make this book returned first. And then if I wanted to create a new one, then it's not returned yet, but it was checked out today by, let's say, Peter Parker. So this is book 2's new entry, and it was returned and checked out again. If I go back to book 2's sheet, it's going to say that it's not available right now because it was, even though it was returned by John Smith, it was checked out by Peter Parker. Viewer 6 is saying I'm confused why it does not say N for not available in the formula. No, actually it's referring to the returned field. So if it was not returned, which is N over there, I want it to be not available. And if it was returned, which is yes, I want the availability to be available. So it depends on what you write in the selection fields. I will actually rate this to the chat one, copying the formula, because I know you can't really see it clearly. If I go to the availability field, so you know in last D9, D9 is the returned field. The returned will say yes if it was returned. So I want the book to be available if it was returned. Yeah, I think you missed that part. In the beginning of the webinar, I said on the checkout sheet, while creating that, we had a formula on the checkout sheet saying that the returned is having a formula checking if the return date is empty or full. So if A4 doesn't have a return date yet, it was not returned. And if it does, then it was returned, basically. All right, great. So someone asked about the reminders. date reminders for email. And the easiest way would be to actually first add viewer 6 is asking why is not available in the second formula. It doesn't matter because um, no, it is in the second formula. Just read what I just wrote. So it's checking again. Let's go to the checkout sheet. No, to the book sheet. Okay, if I go back to book 2, the availability is going to change according to the last field of last value of the return field. Um, why is not available in the list? I mean, you could change the design for yourself if you want, if this does not really apply, but the reason for not available to be an option is if the book goes to somewhere else. For example, if it's damaged, if it's being restored, or something else, I want the availability to be not be available. Does that make sense? It is in the second formula because um, if I left it blank, then it would be blank. Okay, just let me know if I need to clarify anything else, alright? Okay. Alright, so if we go back to our checkout sheet, we kind of want to email the people who are close to their due date. Right now we don't have a due date on this, so I'll create one. I'll insert a new row and create a new due date field. So let's say that your library has regulations. Some libraries change it according to, for example, if you borrow an encyclopedia, then the due date would be a month from now, from checkout. But if it's a novel, it's only 7 days or something like that. Alright, so it depends on what you want to design, but I'm not going to add the different date structures for each type of book because we don't have that much time. But the due date is going to be our basis to send the reminders, alright? So let's say that our library had a standard of having a due date 2 weeks after the checkout date, which means 14 days. So I kind of want this due date to be set as a default whenever I enter a checkout date. So I want it to be A3 plus 14, which is going to give me 14 days after the checkout date. Now, remember that the date is always calculated as days. So whenever you have a date field, you can use the number of days to calculate things. There are also a few other formulas that work with date fields. So I'll apply this to the saved records as well because we added the formula later. And exit. Alright, so the due date is the 9th of November if I checked out a book today. Okay, this is applied to all my previous entries, but since they were returned immediately, that doesn't really matter. We can also have a past due fee, and that's also that can also be calculated over here. Alright, so we kind of want to set the email reminders first, but for that I will need this Peter Parker's email, right? So if I go back to my library members sheet, I will add a new email field so that we can pull that from our sheet. So library member email, and save that. So I kind of want to edit this very quickly. So S Jackson for Sarah Jackson at example.com. Hope that works. Alright, I'll save this. So each of my library members have emails now, and we will want to remind them that the due date is approaching whenever there is a situation like that. Okay, so from the design mode again, from the linking tools, I will click the library member's title so that I can actually um, link with the existing. Alright, I'll save that. And to make sure that the loaded fields, since I linked this later, it's not going to have a value, and I wanted to synchronize with the ID field over here. So again, from sheet linking tools, next to library members, the title, you're going to see a little gear icon. Sorry, the thing is trying very hard to catch up. Oh, there it is. So the gear icon, and if I click the gear icon, I can synchronize the set of linked fields with the updated source value. So that's the first option under link and load sync. And I'll click that to kind of refresh everything over here and exit. Alright, so Peter Parker has an email now, even though it's Peter Parquet. I didn't misspell, but that's fine. It's an example. And I kind of want Peter Parker to know that the due date is approaching and like 5 days before the due date. So to do that, I'm going to go to design mode again. And you can see that on form settings tab, there is going to be a reminder tab underneath there. And I want it to be set to the due date, and 5 days before the due date, I remind the library member email field. And when you add the reminder, it's going to be saved underneath the reminders over here. You can actually say like past due 1 day after the due date. Now, this has its own problems too, because as you can see, I don't really configure that much things, so I can't really customize the email, or I can't really like say that um, I don't have a setting to say if it's not returned, then send this, right? So to do that, it's possible to use some JavaScript and custom write your own emails. But if you want a very simple thing that reminds your librarians, then you can use this and remind the user who created this, for example, the created by email. But again, I mean, if you want a more complicated system, you can use JavaScript on the sheet, and then the email says this record related to, well, I'm not sure about the exact text, but it says something like a record related to you is um, with a reminder setting, I think, past due, and then it shows the record underneath. that text. I'm not really sure about the exact same text. I think we have an example in the user guide. But yeah, I mean, it's not the most ideal reminder. This reminder is usually used for people who actually know the internal database and how it works. But if you wanted to custom write an email with HTML, then you can go to the backend and write it on the JavaScript. Again, there are examples for that. I will copy paste in an example that's in our user guide in the chat box now. I'll quickly go. Alright, so this one is a custom sales order thing, so that will kind of send an email when an entry is saved, but of course it's possible to get other like data from different fields and add it to the email text. Yeah, I did just paste the link for the email example in the chat box. I know the screen looks a little bit funky right now, but alright. So again, I'm also going to add a little thing to calculate past due fees. So I kind of want to say if it's past due. So that means if the return date A5, this is going to be a selection field of yes or no again. And we want this to be yes if the value of A5 is larger than the A4 value. And we want it to be past due for this, and if not, it's going to be not past due. So let's see if this works properly. I'm going to apply this formula so Ragic will calculate it for me. Let's see. So it's not like past due yet, but let's say if I returned it 1 day later than the return date, and it's going to turn into yes. So I also want to calculate the days it was past due. So for that, I need to use A5 minus A4, which will give me the number of days between the return date and the due date. So that's going to be numerical too. And let's say we charge $1 per day that was past due. Like, okay, for more complicated, let's say it was 60 cents per day it was past due. So I kind of want to past due fees, which is going to be a numerical field, a money field. So for each day it was past due, A15 times 0.60, and save that. So let's say that Peter returned this on the 11th, which is going to be 2 days past due, and let's see, why does A5 minus A4 not? Oh, I changed the field name instead of adding the formula. Sorry about that. Days past due as the name of the field, and the formula is going to be A5 minus A4. Save. Okay, I want to apply this formula to calculate and apply this formula to calculate as well. So yeah, that looks correct. If he returned it on the 12th, then it would be 3 days and the past due fee would be $1.8. Makes sense? Any other questions so far? Right. Now, next up, we want to show all the checkout that Peter has done so far on Peter's sheet, right? So we go back to the library members, and we already have this library member ID linked on our checkout sheet. So the only thing I'm going to do is to link that back over here using our reference subtable. So the same thing we did on the books, but less complicated. So if we click change design on the library member sheet, and sheet linking tools, show references from existing sheets. So I know this is taking some time to catch up from the streaming. I'm actually not really happy with this. On the next webinar, we are planning to use YouTube live streaming, so that should be more smoother. Okay, show references from existing sheets is what I'm clicking, and I want to link it to the checkout sheet, and drag and drop the link subtable. Okay, so what I need is the checkout ID, date, due date, return date, and if it was returned or not. The book ID, yeah, I do need that. The first name, last name comes from here, so I don't need those. If it was past due and whatnot. So all the information on the checkout sheet, except the ones that I already got from here, are going to be added. So we can see the member's history. And you can actually have a member's balance. For example, if they had credit in their card, and then if they paid their past due fees or not, and you can add that whole system. Alright, so the last 15 minutes we have is going to be question and answers. Please let me know your questions, and again, for the people who have just joined, you can click on the chat button. When you hover on your screen, it's going to be on the top, the second button on the top. So let's kind of check other members' information. And you can see that this is automatic, so it's not like, right, so on my calculation, I didn't really say don't calculate it if it's not past due, but we can do that. So on our checkout sheet, let's kind of do that because it looks awkward if it's a minus value. So let's say if A14 is no, then 0. Otherwise, it's A15 times our value. And since A14 is a selection field, I need to add the raw here because it's referencing to a string. And I'm going to do the same thing for A15. I'm going to calculate these in the background so that it won't show me negative values. Yeah, it's a14.raw. That raw means that I'm referring to a string value. So because a14's value is always going to be text, I need to add that raw. Yep, that is a period. Alright, I'm checking to see if my formula is correct again. And yeah, so if it's 3 days past due, it's 1.8. If it's not, then we don't have any fees. And it's not saying days past due, negative something. Alright. Um, any questions so far? No problem, viewer 6. Anyone was trying to create a checkout system? Because last week we had no, 2 weeks before we had 2 people who were actually doing something similar with their fitness. I believe it was a gym, and they were trying to create a system that would update other values when you changed some, and I talked about that mostly. No problem, viewer 3. Any other questions? If this is not really applicable to your case, then you can describe a little bit and let me know what you think about the checkout system. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. When you do these types of linkings, you just remember that the reference subtable that we added to both books and the library members to show their previous checkouts, that one is a reference subtable, so it's going to show updated values. It's going to be like only displaying values from the other sheet because we have that link in between. If you had created a new sheet from the subtable, it would be linked to the sheet in a sense where if you update one value from one end, the other one would also update. But this is a different type of linking that displays values, so we can always count on, like, if the book was returned, it's going to be available on this one. So I like to use a reference subtable in these cases. Alright, thank you so much for joining. We have 10 minutes left. If you have any questions, I'm going to be here. Sure, please ask your question, viewer 6. Okay, viewer 6 is saying about importing vendors. How do I ensure this goes smoothly? For example, if there are fields that we added or took away in Ragic. So there are 2 things about that that comes off the top of my head. If you don't have a field that you have, okay, um, let's talk about it this way. If we have an import file with like 12 columns and you have only like 6 fields on Ragic, so you have less fields on Ragic and you have more fields in your spreadsheet, that's going to be fine. In the import process, we have a um, mapping step so that you make sure that each field is going to be mapped correctly to the one you're importing into. So even if you have like more fields on the Ragic side, that's also fine if you wanted to import everything twice, but to update records that already are in your spreadsheet. That would also be fine. So let's actually make an example out of that. I do have an example spreadsheet. Let's see, webinars. I don't know if I have enough data in this, but let's see. Oh, oh, this is broken. No. You know what? I'll show you a picture example because my spreadsheet is kind of formatted incorrectly. So there's also this mass file upload process for the import. But basically, when you're preparing the import, you gotta make sure the first row, I don't know if you can see over here, I'll just paste this link as well. The first row is gonna be the field titles, and the rest is gonna be the data that's gonna go in the titles in Ragic. Okay, like this structure. Okay. Next up, you have to make sure on the mapping process that I talked about, which looks like this. There's a drop down for um, each column, and you can have different field names, but it's okay if you map it correctly. So on here, the field names are always going to be the same in our examples, but for example, if the product name is named like name instead of product name, Ragic might not automatically map it to the correct field, and you'll just select the drop down over here, and that will show you all the fields on your spreadsheet, and you can choose the correct one to map into. So those values will go into that new field. All right. And then while importing the import policy, um, there are two options over here. I know this is like tiny right now, but one says create new entry and the other says renew data. So that is, for example, on your vendor thing, let's say that you had a company named um, vendor 1, and the vendor 1, let's say, has a new address in your spreadsheet and the old address in Ragic. If vendor 1's code, the key field, is the first column and you say renew data, then the address will be updated and all the other fields that are new in your spreadsheet will update the old ones in Ragic. So that's what renew data means. Um, yeah, and that's about it. Does that make sense? If there are fields that you added or took away in Ragic, I mean, that doesn't really impact how the import process works. It will just see if there are like the related fields there and you can map them correctly. And the ones that you added in Ragic, if you don't have it in the spreadsheet, then they're going to be empty when you import your data. Viewer 3 is asking, just wondering, can we have action button some other place on the sheet, or it's always at lower right corner? Yeah, unfortunately, it's always at the lower right corner when you add an action button. You can actually use the URL that's being used in the action button thing, but where would you put that? I'm not really sure. You can make it a default URL, but I mean, it's not very practical when you use a URL on our interface because you have to select the field and then click the URL, which is not very helpful. So the action button is always there and you know it's gonna work in one click. Alright, so yeah, unfortunately there is no other place to put action buttons. Any other questions, you two? We also have the viewer 8. Do you have any questions? Alright. Thank you all so much for joining the webinar. I'll still be here for the last 5 minutes, but if you have any questions, but please feel free to log off. And viewer 8 has logged off, so they don't have any other questions, I guess. Alright, so if you have any other questions that you think of afterwards, you can email support@ragic.com. I'll write that here as well. And please feel free to, ask anything about your specific database. I know everyone's designing something else and it might not apply, or you can't relate to the user guide documentation. For example, a lot of people ask me why it's mostly about sales, but that's what most people do. So um, most of our examples are on that line. But if you have like something that you want to ask about your specific case, just describe it to us in an email and we'll make sure to point you in the right direction. Alright, thank you so much for joining. I will be ending this webinar now, and again, you can email me at support@ragic.com if you have any other questions.